All righty, everyone. We are going to get going with our next session. So we are so excited to have Sammy here, and Sammy is just a wealth of energy. And I personally have had the experience to work with Sammy. So Sammy, I thank you so much for being here today. Sammy is actually a food stylist. So we heard Carla this morning, Sammy, talk about the magazine she works with, and Sammy on the back end does a lot of that food prep. So she's a stylist. She works for brands such as Better Homes and Gardens, Food and Wine, Eating Well, All Recipe, and she does do a handful of things for DSM and IA magazine. She also is one of us. She co-owns a ramen club, which is a pop-up that works out of kitchen spaces on Wednesday night. She has some pretty creative combos, and her fiance and her dog eat all her cheesy creations that she does. So she's going to work with us today. She's got 2 devices to kind of help us through getting those great shots. So we just came off of Carla talking how to reach out. We just had Emily talk about the importance of social media, and Sammy's going to get us all ready to have great photos for all of that. So Sammy, I'm going to kick it over to you and take it away.
Great. Hello, friends. Hope everyone is doing awesome. It's beautiful out there today. So thank you for sharing your time with us. I'm going to share my screen quick so you guys can have a visual. Let's see. Oh my gosh, here we go. Can everyone see my screen okay? Great. So I was going to introduce myself, but Christina did such a killer job. There's no need for me to go into it any further. But again, my name is Sammy Mila, and I have been a culinary specialist and food stylist for a little over 10 years now. With my title, it comes with tasks such as recipe testing and development, food photography, and food videography. I have a niche in editorial food photography as opposed to advertising food photography. And the differences between the two would be that, like, you hear all the time about, oh, the food that they use in the photos are fake, like that's not real milk, that's Elmer's glue, et cetera, et cetera. And that is true half of the time, and that is on the advertising side. So if a cereal company were to hire me to food style and they just needed like a really cool shot of their cereal in a bowl or pouring out of the box, the food item that I am featuring is the only food item that needs to be authentic. So in cases like that, the milk can be Elmer's glue or shortening or whatever I could choose to use, so long as the cereal I am promoting is real. On the editorial side, we want to focus and showcase recipes, and I'm sure most of you today are going to be doing the same. Every component of the recipe needs to be authentic because it is the recipe we are visually representing. So if it's a recipe for pasta, the pasta itself needs to be authentic, the sauce needs to be authentic, the cheese and the herbs you put on top all also need to be authentic and edible, since it is a representation of the recipe that we are showcasing. So on top of all that, again, Christina said, I work for a handful of brands, both national and local, and I am co-owner of Ramen Club. So if anybody has any questions about what I do or Ramen Club at all, feel free to reach out, ask me any questions. I'm an open book. I have all my contact information for you guys at the end. So I'm going to go through 3 tips with you for good food photography. And first and foremost, and to me most importantly, especially for local brands such as you guys, is to represent yourself and your brand as organically as possible. You're going to be shooting these photos of your story, your brand, your aesthetic. So the more natural it comes off to you now, the easier it's going to be for you in the long run. Now that you have your brand established or are on the way to get your brand established, you're going to have busy days. It's going to be meetings and days in the kitchen, days with the family. And when you're taking photos of your brand or yourself, you want them to be as effortless as possible. That way, when consumers go to your webpage or go to your social media, they can kind of pick up your vibe immediately. You can be a person that gravitates towards a clean and focused aesthetic. Whereas if you're making pasta or pie or cake, that's kind of the only thing you want in the scene. And this is just a couple examples of photos I did at work. And I'll be totally transparent and tell you that I'm not sure when these photos are getting published. So all of the photos I'm showing you today are going to be in process shots. So I don't get a slap on the back of the hand. I'm showing you photos that aren't yet printed. Also, pro tip for you guys at home, when you're setting up for photo shoots for whatever it may be, I highly suggest that you work in stages. And what I mean by that is, for example, the bread I have on screen right now, you lay it out on your background, you get a shot of it whole, and then you start slicing, and then you'll get shots of it as you're slicing, and then you can go all the way as to slice the whole thing, throw some butter or some jam on that. You never really want to jump to a deconstructed image right away, just because, you know, worst comes to worst, it doesn't work out, you don't have anything to fall back on. Whereas if I'm slicing this bread and it turns out, oh, I have a lot of tunnels, I have a lot of air bubbles in there, it didn't slice the way I wanted it to, since I have a shot of it whole, I have that to fall back on. So it's kind of like you're self-insuring yourself a little bit. So from clean and focus, you also have organic and natural. If you like things to be kind of messy, kind of crowded, definitely showcase that in your photos. If you're a baker and you literally have flour everywhere, embrace it, because that is who you are. And as a consumer, as someone that's scrolling through your photos and through your feed, we want to be able to capture that personality through what you're showing us. So lots of crumbs, lots of messes, lots of smears, lots of things on the edge of your crops and everything like that kind of gives the photo, I guess in the industry, we like to call it life goes on. It's kind of morbid. But what we mean by that is that the shot that we're showing you is just a fraction of the whole scene. So we'll have glasses of wine that's kind of cut off, utensils kind of scattered about, crumbs that are kind of falling off the scene. So it kind of gives people that feeling of like, oh, it's a little bit more natural. This is like actually happening, as opposed to a stage photo shoot, which in reality it actually is, but not all the time. Another pro tip for you guys, as you're going through and taking these photos for your brain or for yourself, is to take as many photos as possible. As I was saying earlier, as you're working with stages, like with this key lime pie, you shoot it whole, you shoot it with a slice out, you take another slice out, you take a bite out, and you have this gradual timeline of your photo shoot. Is to make sure you flag and keep all the ones that you do like, because when life does get busy, you're not going to have time to do full out photo shoots all the time. So at least this way you have photos in your pocket that you can post later. Okay, second tip for you guys is lighting. This is super, super important to really capture your aesthetic in your food, depending on what you're shooting. You see all the time conversations about cool lighting, natural lighting, warm lighting, tungsten lighting, backlit, side lit. And with lighting, you have shadows. They go hand in hand because you can't have one without the other. So at this point, I'm going to switch to my phone and I'm going to do a little real-time example of lighting and its effects on literally anything. So I'm going to switch here. Okay, I think you guys can see me now. Can you guys see my phone screen okay?
We can't see it. Wait, if you spotlight.
You can see the vegetable. There you go. You can see it now.
Okay, great. Sorry, things always get confusing when I try to use two different pieces of technology when one is already over my head. Okay, so I just threw together a random bowl of just stuff I had in the fridge. And this is completely natural lighting. I've got windows on this side, so you can kind of see the light shining here on the oranges. And this is no artificial light at all. For those of you at home, I highly recommend, if you haven't already, investing in a ring light. And you can get those off of Amazon for not very much at all. I have one here. And I want to say this was like probably 20, maybe 30 bucks. And I'll show you how this makes a difference to this, even though my windows are totally open. This is with absolutely no light. And then I'm going to turn it on. Just kidding. Now I'm going to turn it on. And that's with the ring light. Like, natural lighting is great, but a ring light definitely makes the difference because it's giving you that directional lighting that most professional photos will have. And as I was saying earlier, oh my gosh, it's so hard doing this by myself. You can't have light without shadow, and you can kind of see the shadow here coming on this side. So I also wanted to do real-time comparison of, like, the closer the light comes to the food, the shorter your shadow becomes. The further the light goes, the longer the shadow becomes. And then you can also play around with, like, if you want your light totally overhead, you're looking more at like makeup lighting. And then whether you want your food to be kind of more backlit, more side lit, front lit, you just have to consider what that shadow is going to do to your food also. On top of that, you can change the tone of your color. So this right now on the ring light is natural light or daylight. This is cool light, and this is warm light. It may be kind of hard to see on screen, but as the light changes color, the color of your food also changes. So definitely something important to keep in mind about your aesthetic and what you're shooting, and kind of how the color of your food is going to come off. Again, with Instagram and the filters they've kind of provided you guys, it makes things a little easier to edit, but definitely something to keep in mind. Also, where your light is positioned in the tone of your light also depicts the time of day. So you have morning light, you have midnight light, you have midday. So it's like, if it's sunrise, you get a longer shadow. If it's more about lunchtime, noon light, you get less of a shadow. I know in the industry directionally, we're going for a lot of harsh lighting, which is more direct, unfiltered lighting. Kind of hard to capture at home, but I've seen people do it with the flashlight on a phone or an actual flashlight and just kind of like beaming onto your food a little bit. But you do have to be careful with that because it can come off artificial. So another pro tip for me is that if you wanted to go with direct light, a lot of us here are bakers, so I would highly recommend using parchment paper as a filter to help diffuse that light a little bit. It'll definitely give you more of that diffused ring light kind of glow that's more ideal for home shoots. This is natural light. And so then on top of all that, I grabbed a handful of things that was also just hanging out in my kitchen to kind of show you guys that like, if your aesthetic is more clean and focused, you like hard lines. And what I mean by hard lines is you can see the shape of this bowl. It's kind of a perfect circle and you kind of want to leave it at that. Or again, if you're a little bit more organic, a little more natural, you can throw a couple things in here. Like you can throw a couple glasses kind of off to the side. You can have some plates here with some silverware kind of cut off. And maybe throw a linen just to kind of give it a little bit more texture and a little bit of softness. And what I mean by that is you have hard lines from the plates, the bowls, the glasses, whereas this is a little bit more of an organic wave and it'll kind of break up those harsh lines that we like to call in the industry and kind of just make it look a little more lived in, a little bit more casual. If I was shooting something with crumbs, I would probably put a little bit of crumbage on the surface or maybe some pepper. You can also do things like playing with shadows and reflections. Like you can see that my wine glass is leaving a little bit of a shadow here without actually seeing the glass. And this again gives you that life goes on kind of feeling of like, oh, this is just part of the scene. Whereas in reality, this is kind of all I have on the table. Okay, switching back to computer now. Back to my screen. Okay, can everyone see my PowerPoint okay now?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, now that we talked a little bit about lighting, I kind of wanted to piggyback off of the social media presentation that you guys had before me and share a couple of tips and tricks about posting on social media that can kind of aid in discovery. The 3 tips that I got came directly from my Instagram representative. And this was, I think, current as of late last year, early this year. And what Noah had told me is basically posting consistently across 5 main surfaces is key to growing on Instagram. It's better to post on all surfaces less often than just consistently to one surface, but never stop doing whatever surface gets you the most traffic. And what I mean by 5 main surfaces are these here, kind of broken. He broke this down for me. So then each week we aim for at least 3 photos in your feed. So photos in feed is surface 1. 1 to 3 videos in feed. So videos in feed is surface 2. 1 Instagram, TV, or live video that's over 3 minutes, which is surface 3. 8 to 10 stories, literally, ideally several every day. Can be a mix of photo and video. That one doesn't really matter as much as surface 4. And lastly would be 2 to 3 reels per week. So this is pretty heavy and it's quite a lot, but this is what he had told me that will best aid you in discovery, whether it's local or national or just Instagram in general, just because Instagram now has switched to an algorithm where it's not chronological. So doing things in this way or within this parameter will definitely help your images and your videos come to the top of the feed for a lot of your followers, especially if they interact with your content a lot. Lastly is about hashtags. I don't know how accurate this is anymore. I know some things have changed via Instagram, but most of the time it's like You can't have any more than 30 hashtags a post, but 3 to 5 is pretty much all you really need to aid in discovery. Your hashtags won't really help you only if you've uploaded spam or you've violated their terms and conditions. And I wish I could give you more detail on that, but I really don't know since I'm not super fluent in social media. I try to be, but like I said, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of mental capacity, especially when you have tons of other things going on for your brand. And that's pretty much my little gist on food photography. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shout them out.
I say we have about 10 minutes left if anybody has any questions.
Sammy, there's a few questions in the chat.
Oh, okay. Let me check that out. Specific ring light. My brand is called Woonew, WONEW. And it just came straight from Amazon. I could probably find you guys a link. I got it over a year ago though, so I'm really not sure if Amazon still carries it. I feel like they would, but.
There's a lot of good ring lights on Amazon. I feel like, yeah, lots of stuff out there.
Yeah, they're so popular nowadays, especially because everyone is working from home. Let's see. What about light boxes for photos? Is there one you recommend? I personally have not worked with light boxes. So unfortunately, I don't have a recommendation. I have seen people work with light boxes and they seem to work pretty well. But I feel as if light boxes really limit your space. And so if you wanted to do something a little bit more grand where you want to show multiple cakes or pies or more of a dinner setting, it limits you a little bit. But it is great for product shots. So if you have an online market or a website where you wanted to feature a specific item, light boxes can work really well. Backdrops when photo is not from above. So if you do want to come down low, the easiest thing I tell people is if you have like a bed sheet or like a quilt or something that's kind of cool that you like, just kind of use that as a sweep. And what I mean by that is just having it hang up and then kind of sweep down, whether it's on the floor or on the table. And that'll kind of give you this like flawless kind of like horizonless backdrop. If you want something a little bit more natural, you can definitely use, honestly, a wall. You shoot on your kitchen counter and kind of use the backdrop that you have in your kitchen, or like, I know, a stack of books, you know, something just kind of there to give it texture, because for the most part, you're going to be so close up on your food that your depth of field is going to be pretty shallow. And what I mean by that is the amount of your photo that's going to be in focus. So the closer you are to your food, the more blurry, I guess you can say, everything in the background is. So what you actually use for your background isn't as important as what you have in focus for your photo. Let's see. I make decorated sugar cookies and having trouble with icing colors looking washed out in natural light when I take the pictures. I say cookies can be hard just because, especially when you're icing, because they don't really have a natural color. The color is depicted by how much food coloring you use or how much sprinkles you use and stuff like that. So when I've shot things like that, we rely a little heavier on editing and posts, whether upping the contrast or saturation or anything like that to really help your colors pop. You really get in a sticky situation when all of the props and everything you have around you look good in one light, whereas something else in there, like your cookies or your cakes, look good in a different light. So definitely just keeping the saturation and contrast kind of higher in photos like that to really make your colors pop is definitely what I recommend for that. Also, pro tip for a lot of home bakers and home photographers is that when you're shooting food, 9 times out of 10, it will always look good on white. And when you're out shopping for props, whether you're going to Target or Williams Sonoma or anything in between, they're going to have something available in white. So it helps your photos stay consistent and it helps your colors pop. Whether you have powdered sugar cookies on white, you're still going to get that texture. Whether you have chocolate cookies on white, you're still going to get that texture. Filters on photos, do you recommend them? And or is there a photo editing app that you recommend? I personally edit everything on Instagram. I know Lightroom on the computer, Adobe Lightroom. I know a lot of people have used that. I am not super familiar with it. I wish I was, because I know it can do beautiful things. But me personally, I try to edit as little as possible and focus more on the real-time manipulation, whether it's light, color, tone, etc. But I mean, I don't have a problem with photos that are edited. I think if it definitely boosts what you're doing, then 100% I support you, especially if you have a certain aesthetic that really relies on that. Like you want things to be very sharp and contrasted, or you want things to be very dark and moody. Sometimes it's really hard to get that in real time. And if you practice and get enough experience in it, I think you can do some beautiful things. What advice do you have on best camera angles for cakes and cupcakes? In the industry, we shoot a lot of things overhead just because it's kind of what works best for food for the most part. For cakes and cupcakes, it can be a little different because you really want to focus on height, whether it's the height of your cake, whether it's the height of your frosting. The height of baked goods, especially for cakes and cupcakes or anything with frosting, is kind of what gives it that yum, that wow, like, oh my gosh, look at that meringue and how wispy it is, or that cupcake has so much frosting, it looks so good. So I would say 3/4 angle, which is halfway between overhead and low. Or if you really want to focus on just one cupcake or one slice of cake that may have some drips of like lemon curd or chocolate, like definitely go low, definitely get intimate. And like I said earlier, just try a lot of angles, try a lot of things out, because something you may not like now could be something you like later. And at least then you have it in your pocket to post later and just kind of keep your feet active. Apps for basic food editing. Again, I just use Instagram. I think the editing that they offer on Instagram is pretty good. I mean, I don't need to do anything like take out blemishes or, add, gosh, I don't know, like I'm going to add an extra chocolate chip, or I'm going to clone this crumb onto this side of the plate instead. I don't do anything crazy like that. It's pretty much just lighting, color, tone, and contrast. So I think Instagram is honestly pretty good for that. Do you recommend having your hands in photo with food? Sometimes I've had people complain about touching food. This is actually a pretty relevant issue we have in the industry right now, just because we're deep into a pandemic and everyone is just a little weirded out by hands on food. I think it gives the photo movement. If you want to get shots of you sprinkling or drizzling, I think hands in food can be beautiful, especially if you want to like hold the plate. Then it also gives you like size reference. If you are featuring mini cupcakes and you want to hold it or do something like that, then it's just like, oh my gosh, those are mini. Those aren't, actually full-size cupcakes. That's kind of great. If you are a little weary about that and are a little weary about people kind of being like, oh my gosh, you're touching the food, how could you? Another thing you can do for size reference, again, is like using silverware, because forks usually are of a standard size. Plates and glasses can also give you a great size reference, or, something that is of a typical size that you can think of, whether an apple you can think of an average size for that, grapes. Towels are kind of hard, but towels do help with texture. But in short, I don't I don't have a problem with hands in food. I think it could definitely add beauty and movement to it. Sometimes people tend to overthink things. I deal with that a lot. But if it fits your aesthetic and it's something that you really think showcases you and your personality, I say you go for it. Like, I don't think it's weird, or I don't think you shouldn't, just because of the time that we're in, especially because it's not necessarily meant to feed people, it's art.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions in there, Sammy. If you have that ring light and you don't mind dropping it in there, somebody specifically did ask if you have the link, and your email, if that's okay. I know you dropped it in there, but if you want to drop it in there, that would be great. So they can reach out directly to you. And Sammy, also, I'm just going to put a plug in for recipe development. If you're struggling on any of that, Sammy also does that. I've personally used her for a product we were playing around with at the shop. So she does that as well. If you need help with making it more shelf stable or anything like that, she is a wealth of knowledge in that as well. So thank you, Sammy, so much for being here today. I appreciate your time. And honestly, this was amazing that you could just flip that and do that. Having that hands-on, I think, was incredible for a lot of us to see that. So